Well, there was this one time uh, I told Elon Musk to go step on a Lego.
Wow, that sounds familiar.
Oh, damn it. I can't steal stories when the person's there. Damn.
Hey, if you're willing to take the ban, you can have it.
Hello and welcome to the QUACKCAST, the Drunkduck QUACKCAST, number 581. With me, Ozone Ocean, and also Baines, Tanserine, and HB Comic. Hello.
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 So, in this QUACKCAST, we're going to be introducing and also doing an interview with HB Comic, who is a long-time Drunkduck member and has come back to us.
I've resurfaced.
Resurfaced. He's resurfaced. He is a great Drunkduck member, a great comicer in general, with a lot of experience in the comic industry, and now he's going to be doing some news posting for us, which is fantastic. So we're going to be talking about that and his history with the site and comics in general. Before we get into that, have to bring up the featured comic. So I will tell you about the featured comic now. So, the featured comic this week was Succubus. A succubus is a very particular kind of demon, sexy and extremely dangerous, and Mary is an exceptionally dangerous demon. Mary wasn't always a succubus. She had a very traumatic transition into becoming one. She was human and alive once. A horrible event changed all that, and now she's out for revenge. She's back in town to settle some heavy scores and take her pound of flesh, literally. Succubus is a true horror comic, so reader, beware. There are various strong themes that might be triggers. Sexual violence is referenced. Succubus is the joint project of the long-time collaborative team Monique McNaughton and Daryl Hughes. The art and writing talents respectively. The art is in Monique's signature retro style, quite textual, lots of heavy blacks and thick outlines, and deep shading, some accents of colour. This story is a horror revenge mystery thriller told from the point of view of the monster, in inverted commas. Well, she is a monster, but not as we would regard a monster, because she's righteous in her fury. So the reader will sympathise with her. So this is a great little project. Daryl Hughes, also known as the D-Man, and Monique, also known as Koi Dog, on the site. This great creative team have been responsible for many a great comic and many a featured comic, like Cavalier and Arrow Flight Chronicles, various things. Oh, actually, Daryl Hughes wasn't part of Arrow Flight Chronicles, but they've been a team on many projects like GAC, the Alien, things like that. So I hope you enjoy this comic. It's a excellent piece of work. It's just like you used to find in the comic shops and news agents and stuff like that. It's really much in that style. It's quite a trip down memory lane to see this kind of a horror comic in this style. It's not really something you find commonly on the internet these days, to have a comic in this particular retro style. So it's really cool. Have a good read of that. Yes, and again, reader beware, it's triggering content. So great comic, Succubus by the D-Man and Koi Dog, rated M for mature. And that was the featured comic. Okay, so next up we have the featured music. So, this week Gun Wallace has given us a great little theme to Ghost Network. Xylophone bones tapping a heavy tune on dried out ribs, grinding into a veil of deep red, steaming and chugging through into a cloud of mystery. This is a jaunty ditty crossed with a dark, heavy electronic piece for a very unusual mix. So take it away, Gun Wallace, with Ghost Network. And that was Gun Wallace with the theme to Ghost Network, which is a comic by Oh No Melon, and it's rated T for teen. Thank you very much for that, Gun Wallace. Right, okay, HP Comic. Although I keep thinking HPK Comic, which is wrong. It's because you got a K instead of a... Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it's a dumb screen name, but I was a dumb kid when I came up with it, so... It's actually a video game reference, so...
Oh, is it?
Yeah, because I used to go... My first online screen name was Hyper Paracarry, because I was referencing a Paper Mario character. Then I shortened it to Hyper PK, then HPK, and then because I started doing comics more regularly, it became HP Comic. So, yeah. My incredible journey.
From gamer to comicer, which was not an uncommon origin story for those days.
Oh yeah, the Sprite comics, man. They're still going.
Sprite comics and Slice of Life gamer comics. We're talking PvP, Penny Arcade. Yeah, it was a thing.
Yep.
So your first comic, what was that? That was
Warped.
Yeah. So did you start out doing the gamer comic?
No. Actually, the Warped has its genesis from me doing dumb comics for my friends in high school, because we had a planning period. So, and that's a okay, I wouldn't say it's like a free period in the school, but it's like, you're supposed to use that to catch up on homework. And me being me, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to draw. So all my friends and I would sit together and we'd make these really stupid comics. And, I'd pass them along with note paper and everything like that. And then I realized after reading a couple comics online, I'm like, well, I have a copy of Photoshop I got from the art teacher. Why don't I try making comics and putting them online? So that's the genesis of that. There are video game jokes, but it's mostly just those old MySpace kind of era comics where it's LOL so random, that sort of thing. That's the origins of that. And then I was like, no, I want to do something a little more structured.
I remember the So Random stuff. Yeah, that was a big thing for a long time.
Yeah, and like anyone's first comic, it's full of like in jokes that are only funny to the 2 or 3 people who actually like understand the reference. To everyone else, it's just like, I don't get it.
Well, that said, for a first comic, it's very polished, work. This is something that I would put up as a feature these days. It's
I appreciate that. Like, a lot of it was like a real learning process for me because like this was my first time. I'd only had Photoshop like the year before, and a lot of it was me just learning like, okay, well, how the hell do I do this? And a lot of it was just, how do I take something that I draw on lined printer paper and turn it into a digital image?
Right. The whole scanning process and layers and drawing over stuff. So did you have a graphics tablet for this, or was this done with mouse and stuff?
The first few pages, the first few pages were just basically me using the mouse and taking like the adjustment layers on the scan and darkening the lines but lowering the mid values to kind of make it as black and white as I could. I had an art teacher who was very, very encouraging though, and she actually gave me a like an old school tablet that USB connection, no screen. Like I work from a Cintiq now, but this is one of those where you have to look at the monitor, but you're drawing on a separate little plastic tablet. So that's what she had given me. And I always have to draw at an angle. So what I did is I Velcroed that thing to a binder, and I filled the binder with paper to kind of reinforce it and give me kind of that like angle to draw at.
Right.
Yeah, I can be inventive.
Gave yourself a drawing pad feel as well.
Yeah, I think if you link the comic in the show notes or whatever, I think I start doing the drawing on the Wacom tablet with the second story.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is after zombies. And...
Yeah, it came from the fridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great title.
Yeah, well, it's amazing. So you had already had like artistic kind of skill, obviously, before this.
Yeah, I draw all the time. That's part of how I learn. Like if you ever look at my notes in college, like doodles everywhere, all the way down the margin, because like again, how the brain works is that like weird associations. So like I have to like draw something in order to remember something. Yeah. So a lot of my notes have these doodles, but like I drew as a kid all the time. That was like my hobby. And a lot of the characters I'm working with now, I invented when I was a kid. And I've just kept going with them.
So they've had a lot of time to develop.
Yeah. At this point, Dash is at least old enough to vote. So good for him.
So you started out there. You moved on to Cosmic Dash, all sorts of other stuff. But you were... like, you stayed with Drunkduck kind of really solidly, putting your work up. So much so that I seem to remember that, were you at one stage going to be trying to sell comic scripts to Platinum? Yeah,
because Platinum had their comic book challenge. I'm not going to provide the video of me because I hate that video. But no, it was a competition to pitch comics for them to publish. And I had pitched a comic called Ben's Book of Banned Beasts, and I was in the top 3, but I just didn't win. But then again, I didn't have like the local newspaper backing me like the winner did.
Oh, right.
Oh, okay.
Right. But here's the thing. I don't know what happened to the winner, but I'm still doing comics, so who won in the end?
Well, DJ is still around. DJ Kaufman, who was the winner.
Yeah, well, he was the winner of the first one.
Oh, right.
I was in the second one.
I
think they only did 2 of them. Yeah.
Oh dear, yeah. Well, there was a lot of weirdness with those winners and what they one.
Yeah, the platinum situation, I don't know how much that can be talked about, but that's always been a very interesting chapter of the Duck's history. Some would say maybe even a little checkered.
It's a dark history. That's our
Mhm.
Empire Strikes Back kind of moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Han was in the carbonite at the end of that one.
That's actually probably around just after that is about the time that I started kind of going off and trying to build my own platform and that sort of thing. So yeah, maybe that was my Han Solo in the carbonite moment.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, a lot of people chose that moment to, at least towards the end of the Platinum era, to go their own way. Well, I mean, that was a weird time because we got a lot of new people at that stage with the because it was a gold rush. Because you could make it big, and then there are hills. You could,
and well, and this was the time. This was the time that Zuda Comics was a thing because DC was trying to launch their own webcomic platform with Zuda. And I've met some wonderful people like David Gallagher who did High Moon. He and I talk all the time and everything like that. So there was definitely this kind of like late 2000s webcomic gold rush in a sense. And then as soon as like the internet started privatizing with like Facebook and that sort of thing, we see that kind of gold rush disappear. As things are consolidated. So I've wanted to write a book about webcomic history. I have a friend who's already kind of done that, but I'm like, I want to do it too. So I spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff, like maybe too much time.
It's an interesting history with different stages. I would think.
Very much so, because like it's interesting because like the early days of webcomics were very much about like decentralized, breaking the mold of traditional narrative structure, the infinite canvas, as it were. And then as soon as like people start realizing, well, there could be money in this, it kind of falls back to the traditional structures and that sort of thing. And it's always been this kind of push and pull between openness and tradition.
Very much so, yeah.
I would also posit that the gold rush hasn't really gone. It has just sort of removed itself towards corporate compromise a little bit. I mean, in the sense that people still do try to make it big and join the site that will help them make it big, but also they sort of formulate their creativity towards a specific formula, as you would if you were an employee somewhere, I guess. So,
well, yeah. And I think you have a good point there because, I would say for a good period of about 5 years, the future of webcomics would have been apps, like actually like coding an app for your webcomic. Now it's about that manhwa, that Korean manhwa format where it's scrolling. So it's interesting to see how this has changed. But yeah, right now, like it's so big now with that scrolling format for the smartphone that like, even DC Comics is getting in on it because they're doing their own Batman manhwa on Webtoon or whatever. But like if you these days, if you're doing a webcomic, one of the most important things you can do is make sure it can be read on a phone comfortably. Because that's like, I think 60% of webcomic market share at this point. I think it's, can it be read on a phone?
Yeah, it's sort of exploded and gotten honed down to that one little thing, unfortunately, for better or worse, and all through things like Instagram.
Carving up your comics for Instagram is a nightmare. I when I dropped Facebook, I also dropped Instagram because the other thing is like these platforms are also trying to dominate your time. So like Instagram, in order to break through the algorithm, you have to like do a certain level of posting every day, and that kills your time. And it's like you can't be creative because, you know, it's one thing to be an influencer and take a photo by the pool with a bag of cat food. On the other hand, imagine having to do all these postings while, hey, also I'm hunched over my tablet drawing. Look how glamorous I am. You know, it's taking you away from your drawing too. So it's like, you know, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. It is a drain. Some people do manage it. DJ Kaufman previously mentioned that he made a big thing of Instagram, made it his new home for his way of producing his comics. And Hyena Hell, who used to be very much a Drunkduck contributor, doing more in really kind of indie zine style comics, and she moved on to Instagram as her main means of promoting and posting a comic.
Oh yeah, and I mean, you said it yourself. It's their main means. So again, it's like you have to prioritize that platform. Like, it's totally possible, but I couldn't see myself doing that. Especially, it's not a platform that I don't have like control over. Yeah, you know, because like at least with like my own website or doing a website on the Duck, I can like change the way it looks and everything like that. Like, I still have to do that with the comics I'm archiving now on the Duck, which I plan to do, but it's one of those things where it's like, no, I need to, it's not just the pages themselves, but like how you present them and the aesthetics around them.
Oh, incredibly important. Yeah, Drunkduck is limited since the coding change of 2011, but it is quite possible changing, you know, colors and background images and fonts to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So yeah, even just putting up like buttons, like actual image buttons for the menu can be really helpful. Because right now I just have text buttons, but like even just doing things like that, where it's like maybe a picture of a character saying archive or something like that, that's one of those ways in which you can kind of personalize the experience a little bit more.
Yeah, it's surprisingly effective. But as you say, with Instagram, it is incredibly limited. Even the width of a page, width of a panel, is regulated very specifically.
Yeah, it's this age of conformity somehow. I mean, it's like that to me, and I may be in the get off my lawn cohort now in terms of in terms of creating comics and stuff, but I really don't like all these limits that especially young people set themselves if they are trying. I'm not saying that everyone is doing it. I'm saying that those that try to quote unquote make it big with companies or with specific webtoon companies or or webtoon itself or tapas or whatever, they become streamlined way too early, in my opinion. That might sort of deprive us of uniqueness in style or new approaches and things like that. So I'm kind of hoping that we get this same progression that we did with the phones, in the sense that, remember that there was this tendency to get them as small as possible at some point, like the smallest the better with the cell phones, and then smartphone came out, like and it started becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. So I'm hoping that it dawns on people that some things may be better viewed on your freaking laptop or on a screen that is actually a screen and it's not like a keyhole of a thing.
Well, and I mean, you bring up a great point, because so much of our technology is like influenced by the media we want to consume. The whole reason phones are bigger now than they've been is because now everybody's streaming, so like with, like, for example, like the Korean style manhwa scrolling comics, I see the value of that format. I just feel like not as many people are taking advantage of that, because if you're doing something that's scrolling based, you can really play with the idea of like pacing and having certain beats. But what most people do is they just like randomly move panels around. So, when I'm doing my own archive of stuff, what I tend to do is try to play with like thinking about it completely different than a normal comic page and seeing like what kind of rhythm can be developed. And I think for a lot of creators, they're kind of ignoring that aspect of it, where they could be leveraging the technology. in such an
Exactly,
interesting way.
exactly. That's actually an excellent point, and I'm really like it's really unfortunate that Bitface isn't here because that's exactly what she's doing with her uh, comic that is vertical.
Inhabitants.
Yeah, that is a vertical scroll. I mean, I always forget how to refer to these things.
Mm.
And she can do what I could never do. Like she does this pacing situation. It feels pretty much that it's coming alive and it couldn't be in any other format than this format
Mm-hmm.
for it
Mm-hmm.
to work.
Yeah.
But I get this feeling from like 2, maybe 3 comics
Mm-hmm.
across platforms that I have seen in this format. So yeah.
Yeah, because usually, like the way that people handle this is they just take the panels, make them nice and big, and then just like stack them on top of each other. And it's like, well, no, you have a medium here that you could be exploring. Like, have
Mhm.
us move from left to right and back to left and right to left and all that as we scroll down. Make it feel like a river. And it's just people, like if a character's throwing a punch, imagine the power of having like the trajectory of their arm move us into the next panel as I scroll down from like a nice dynamic angle and really play with this space. And just people aren't really doing that right now.
Yeah, use the Scott McCloud stuff that he
Mm-hmm.
kind of introduced way back when.
Mm-hmm.
And I always come back to my favorite Infinite Canvas comic, which was Wonder Jive, and which was on Drunkduck. And I think it's pretty much like almost a mythical comic now, because a lot of you see references to it from other people as well, and it handled infinite scrolling amazingly. Like you would go from panel to panel and there'd be a speeding train just because of the way it forced you to scroll and all these kind of effects. But it's become mythical because it's nowhere on the net. It's just disappeared. The guy just took it away. But yeah, it is. That was a great example of infinite canvas, which is basically what we're talking about here, but only in that one vector. Whereas people don't really like horizontal scrolling. Although for me, both are good. I mean, Instagram, you can do sort of an infinite canvas horizontally scrolling comic on Instagram. So there is that possibility open to you, and people do it in that people create. You have to cut panels up very specifically and post them, and when people click swipe, you can see the whole thing, coming alive in that way. So it is done sometimes, but not very often. It's good to see it. Yeah, it's not used in. Do you use HPK? Like, have you tried the different kind of angles for the infinite canvas?
I've wanted to. Like right now, mostly I'm just kind of like trying to reinterpret my existing comics in that kind of scrolling format. But like thinking about that idea of like a horizontal scroller, I feel like you could do a story about a guy walking down the street, right? And just you have the same camera angle, but it's him progressing down the street and all these little weird things happening to him. It's like, oh no, that would be brilliant. And it's like, oh man, I wish that I had the time to do something like that. Where it's just, you're scrolling, and it's just following him as he's walking through the city and all these little moments in his walk where he's talking to people and turning that into, and then maybe a character follows him along for a little bit. And then like the character's like, okay, I'm going to dip out. And then like they disappear for a bit and just, it's one of those things where it's like, if I had the time and opportunity, that is stuff that I would love to, I'd love to play around with it. But
it's almost like the way you're talking about there. It's almost like treating it as those single shots. When you see movies and TV shows, they decide
the one takes. Yeah.
Which that's a great model to follow. But the other interesting factor about that is there is only a certain period where what you're viewing can be on the screen at the same time. And you can take advantage of that aspect. Like, by the time they reach this part, that would be off screen. So that's when I can reintroduce the character.
Yeah, so like just brainstorming that right now, it's like you see the potential of using the medium, I think, and it's like finding the time and the availability to do something like that, which is tough because like everybody here has to hustle on stuff.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
We're all adult people now. We don't have the time that we did when we were in high school or university, so we have to prioritize.
I'll tell you what killed me was trying to do my comics while I was doing my master's classes, because that was just my wife didn't really see me for like a year. Like I'd literally come home, go to bed, because I was also teaching, so I was doing my master's degree, I was teaching, I was doing my comics, I was doing my side hustles, I was tutoring. It was a interesting period of time, but I somehow managed to keep the comics going, because like that's the other thing is like, if a person really loves comics, they're gonna do them. It becomes like a compulsion, I think. And that's kind of how you separate like what comics are going to be around for a while and which ones are just kind of someone like doing it as a hobby, I guess. Is like when the life gets tough, do they still feel compelled to do those things?
Yeah, become left aside. Could you let us know what you taught?
Yeah, so actually I'm teaching right now. I am a English teacher at a local college. When I was in my master's program, I was actually, because they hire the students in the literature department to teach the English classes for the freshmen. So I was doing that. So I'm actually currently a English teacher. And if anyone's had an extended conversation with me, like I always try to come at things from like a different angle. So for example, the English class I'm teaching right now is critical thinking, but I'm using monsters. So, we talk about like, it's not just that the werewolf is a big scary dog person, but like, what could the werewolf mean? Like the werewolf could represent someone's sexuality being aggressive, or it could be someone's predatory instincts, or it could be like in the Harry Potter stories, like Remus Lupin's character is written as an AIDS parable because of the way he's ostracized by people, so that's the kind of way that I approach that class, and the students really enjoy it. I've gotten really good feedback from them about like, we're just doing monsters all semester. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Oh, very clever. Wow. And do you bring your webcomics experience to bear?
I don't bring up my webcomics or podcast because like I don't want to like be like ethically violating like the promotion thing. But what I do integrate comics into all of my classes I teach. So in my English 103, we talk about serial killers, so I have them read a little bit of My Friend Dahmer. And I talk about the medium. And then in my English 101, which is like a punk theme, resistance movement themed class, I have them read like some comic books. Like I talk about like 1980s comics. I have them read some like Harvey P. Carr and everything like that. Just like, because comics, as commodified as they became, there's also an independent spirit that ran through them. Because again, like when comics came out, it was all Jewish people who couldn't get work elsewhere, and they were making these comics and they were doing their own thing. And now it's like one of the biggest. The comics themselves aren't the biggest business in the world, but they are the genesis for one of the biggest businesses in the world, which is Disney. So it's like, right. So.
Yes, the huge entertainment industry. They're very essential to that. Extremely.
If I were the professor, the final exam would be all based on my comics.
Yeah, no, that's how, like, believe me, I want to do that. Like, I've dropped some hints about the podcast that I do, but I don't actually like let them know what it is.
Well, we can let people know what your podcast is. So,
okay. So I actually have two podcasts because again, I can't do one thing; I have to do several. So, one podcast that I do is Kids' Stuff, which is a podcast about the Chucky films and the Chucky TV show. And I do that for Haunted MTL. It's on a break right now because Chucky is not on TV right now. The other podcast I do is with another former Drunkducker. This is Kevin Heyman, or Coda Otan. He did Coda's World, The Errant Apprentice, that sort of thing. He and I do a podcast called Supernatural Selection. And what we do is we talk about the occult and conspiracy theories, that sort of thing. I literally just wrote like a 2-hour episode about Alex Chu, one of my favorite internet weirdos, and I'm just so happy to finally do that. And the podcast, that's like become like my third thing. If teaching and comics are my first two things, this Supernatural Selection has become the third thing in my life.
Oh my goodness me! So it's quite a major thing.
Yeah, so it's supernaturalselectionpod.com. And I also do a radio show. So again, like I could talk about any number of things that I do. So yeah.
You're an old hand at doing audio stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, because in high school I did I took a couple audio classes, but I was also one of the kids who edited the morning announcement videos. So I'd be there to like shoot it, and then I'd do like the editing, and then they'd play that and that sort of thing. So I learned really quickly how to like handle editing at a baseline. And if you know video, you can do audio, because it's just the medium may change a little bit, but it's the same principles.
Yeah, a linear editing, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool that you're doing so much with Koto. We've had him on the QUACKCAST a few times, and we loved his Owen Wilson type voice. It's not so Owen Wilson anymore, but it's still a bit of it.
Oh, he's got a sexy voice. I'm just gonna say that. Like Kevin has a sexy voice, and he's the reason why people listen to the podcast.
Well, yeah, and he's an old hand too, doing an Errant Apprentice in Kota's World for many years. So.
Yeah, and just imagine him and I, just because that's what he and I would do anyway. Like I first met him on Drunkduck, right? So he and I have been like hanging out for nearly 20 years at this point, and like for 20 years we've been talking about supernatural crap. You know, we've been talking about like goblins and vampires and alien abductions, and it's like. He's like, I'm going to do a podcast. And I'm like, okay, when am I on? And it was a thing where it was originally just supposed to be like revolving co-hosts, but I was on like 90% of the episodes. So he just had me and his friend Mike come on, and we're now 3 hosts every week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's how podcasts tend to evolve. I mean, that's how Tance and Pitt and Haynes and everyone came along here too.
Something about the rule of 3, because there's always like, you have the different personalities. So I'm like the more like excitable member.
Oh, right.
Mike is definitely the more like choleric personality. And then Kevin's kind of like the straight man in the middle. So it's like, and that same process works across. There's a reason why that sort of trope is universal across projects, because you have, the 2 polar extremes, and then you have the person in the middle, and that's where the interaction is at its best.
Yeah, definitely. That often works. I mean, we are 4-person team generally here, but then we, one drops out, we become 3, and everyone has their specific ways.
Yeah.
Baines is our excellent humorists. I like to build him up so he can't possibly.
Very, very obvious in this episode.
Say something funny, Baines.
Yeah. Oh, humorist, huh? Give us a joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, do it on demand when everyone is like focusing on exactly that. That's exactly how it is.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, he's sweating bullets.
It's true.
Oh dear. And you mentioned you also knew Raven Perez.
Yeah, Raven, good friend of mine. We talk a lot. We're both kind of like beating that indie comics drum. Very okay, I admit I have a Disney Plus subscription, but I am very much like anti-corporate. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like, if it's the only game in town, I'm gonna have to watch it anyway. But it's one of those things where it's like much like Raven, we're both always trying to like platform other creators and be like, no, check this out. You're upset about your favorite character being canceled by that network. Well, here's a comic that features a character like that. Or, oh, you should check out the source material, which ran for 200 issues.
Oh,
That's a good
oh,
point.
that's clever.
Yeah.
Raven's great. He's like I love Raven's Dojo. It is like the most perverted comic. Fantastic. You know, he and I do little crossovers and stuff all the time. So it was nice when he did his like big battle issue and the Cosmic Dash characters show up. I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I love about the internet.
Crossovers. Back in the day with Drunkduck, we would always have crossovers. Did you become part of any of those?
Oh yeah. There was I think Drunkduck High.
Yes.
There was that for a little bit. I do have in my little archive of comics, we were trying to put together a comic called Panel by Panel that had the duck and quail. That one kind of petered out. Then there was the Drunkduck Civil War, which we kind of started brainstorming during a convention. Yeah, and then I've showed up in other people's comics. Dragoneers has a link to a lot of those like old Drunkduck like crossover. Like someone's comic appears in someone's character appears in another person's comic. Yeah, Hogan, who runs that site, has documented a lot of that.
Yes, he was excellent at following all the crossovers. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh dear, yeah. The Civil War.
I'm just,
I remember that.
Yeah, that was because this was at the time Marvel was doing their original Civil War event where it was like, you know, all the superheroes fighting, which so we were like playing around with that. And this was back when like James Riot and Zach Front were there. This was like shortly after the WoWio purchase or the WoWio thing with the duck and everything like that. So it was a lot of us just kind of like sitting around playing with like the imagery of Marvel's Civil War event and pairing off like different creators and having them fight and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it was a brilliant mirroring of the whole Marvel thing. It was fantastic. A lot of us had some part in it. I remember I had a tiny little part in it myself, and like Marvel in the way they did their like main storyline, and then people would do their little individual kind of things of what their character was doing at the time. That was we did that kind of thing. So a lot of people would have their individual Civil War comic.
You know, and then there was also I think it was with Comic Genesis. I think that we had a little like back and forth thing with them, and we had a back and forth thing with Comic Fury for a while as well. Because I recall like collecting little avatars that people made. So like someone did like a Comic Genesis version of me, and then someone did like a koala version of me because one of the users at Comic Fury like did koala versions of everybody involved. You know, so I have these little like archived records of this weird spot in internet history that I look back at fondly.
Oh yes, now these are the kind of things that would be lost in something like Tears in the Rain.
I've seen sea beams glittering off the of Orion.
Exactly.
Oh my.
Oh dear, exactly. These are the big moments in the past of webcomic history. Yeah. Well, that Comic Genesis crossover, yeah, Jesus, I remember that. I don't remember the Comic Fury one, but definitely remember that Comic Genesis. Yeah, some people took it seriously, as if us versus them.
Yeah, as people do. But you know, it's also one of those things where it's like you're not going to really see that anymore. Can you see like could you see a potential crossover fight or whatever between Tapas and Webtoon? Probably not, because they're so commercial, right? But like with, you know, back when we were doing these events, it was because these were like little indie scrappy startups just kind of like having fun, and it was like the Wild West but not as racist. So
yeah. That's amazing. That should be some kind of subtitle for this cast. I don't know how you're going to do it or make it happen.
I don't think I'll put that in the title somehow. I can see us getting in trouble. That's a tricky one. Yeah, it was quite a time. I'm glad we're still around because we are kind of a hangover. We're a weird representative of that era, a bit backwards. but still going on.
Well, and it's as painful as it is to see, like, going through like the listing of comics and seeing something that, like, oh, its last update was 10 years ago. Like, it's cool that it's still there. Exactly. And then also, like, how fresh some of them still seem, because it's like, it may not have been a comic I ever read before, but at least there's like 100 pages of this old comic that I can read and experience for the first time.
Exactly. I mean, even if it's not updating currently, it doesn't matter, because it's there and you've got stuff to read through. It's only disappointing when it's like, I don't know, 20 pages and then they didn't continue the story after that. But
that's a thing that's common across webcomics for decades now, right? Is that you get the person who dabbles for like 20 pages, and then because it's not a compulsion for them, they step away, or they start making those little allowances of like, oh, okay, I'll update in 2 weeks, or like I'll update when I feel like it, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, 15 years later the character is still falling off the cliff or whatever.
Yeah.
Or hanging.
If it was one of my comics, they'd be falling off the cliff, because
it's just going all the way.
Yep.
Yeah, that happens. I mean, one of the reasons I did the fashion feature was so I could have not only a feature on fashion that is shown in the comics, and what that means for the character, and various things, but it's also a way of promoting comics that are no longer updating but are still worth having a look at. So I can.
And also, speaking of fashion, is that a smoking jacket you're wearing?
It's actually a silk dressing gown, but close enough.
Okay, no, I was gonna say, speaking of fashion, you're looking pretty fly there.
Thank you
pretty great.
So much.
He always does. He's our fashion, basically.
Fashion consultant. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I've been looking at the fashion, the fashion posts, because I'm like trying to catch up with everything, because I've not been current in the community for a while, and it's so interesting to like that's cool. That's cool shit. Like I love the idea of just kind of finding this little hook and kind of running with it, because I watch The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs, and he was talking about his career, and he got his start reviewing movies that nobody else would review, because he reviewed drive-in movies. Like the B, like, low budget, often like Italian films that nobody else was reviewing, but he's like, no, I'm gonna review these movies that no one's talking about, and he's leveraged that into like a 40-year career. And he's more popular than he's ever been, because he's like championing these like small projects that nobody apparently cared about, but at least he did. And like doing things like that, like with these comics that have, maybe they're not updating anymore, but it's like, no, check out these costuming choices, right? It's like a really interesting way to kind of preserve that. It's definitely its own little niche, which I really appreciate that sort of thing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I thought it's good to find a little hook in there. But speaking of the Friday news post, so you'll be doing like every second one. So what's going to be your themes, your approach?
So I have been doing reviews on the forum. I'm kind of slowly getting through them, but I'm not going to be reviewing. But the way that I do reviewing is I tend to write a lot. I'm not one of those people who writes short things. I tend to go long. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do a quick review, and it ends up being like 4 or 5 pages. But I think I'm going to put that to good use by looking at panels from comics and just kind of explaining like, well, here's why this panel is so good, or here's why it works so well. Because everybody needs that ego boost. You know what I mean? Like we want to say that like, oh yeah, we're not in it for the praise, but like if you get a comment that's praising something you're doing, you feel better. And I think one of the hard parts about doing stuff like webcomics is like it could take a long time to build that audience, or for people to even get to know what you're doing. So just having someone who pops up out of the blue saying, oh no, you're doing a wonderful job with this. This is really cool. Everybody should be looking at this. I think that goes a long way to kind of creating a community. And I think what I want to see is I want to see what I could do to help bring community back a little bit more, because
Mhm.
it seems like maybe the community has slowed down a little bit. This isn't a criticism or anything like that, but it's just everything has been so centralized to these other platforms that, what can be done to give people a unique reason to look at the Duck, and things like the fashion posts, or me going through these comics and pointing out, hey, check out these cool panels. That might be one of those ways in which we can kind of like bring things back a little bit.
A hook, a promotion. Yeah, that's an excellent idea. Yeah, like the driving. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I really appreciated your the skills you have as a reviewer. Now you've got your English teaching, your literature background that obviously has a part in that. But I remember back in the day you used to do reviews on the Duck too. You're a big advocate of giving reviews and feedback.
Yeah, and especially like because part of the reason I do it is because I want people to eventually come back and see my stuff. Like, that has definitely always been like maybe like 10% of it. It's just, that's how it works. You do things, you put it out there and hope it gets returned to you in some degree, right? But I spend all my time reviewing stuff because I've always been very critical, but I've also always been interested to understand, why do things work? What is it about this that works? What doesn't work? So like, I used to be a little bit of a prick when it came to like movies and stuff like that, where like if I saw a movie I didn't like it, I was like, oh my God, this is the worst piece of shit ever. I'm not that way anymore though. Like, I see value in anything. If there's a movie I don't like I'm not going to say I hate it. I'm going to talk about like, well, here's what I liked about it, or here's something that I think was interesting, but here's what I would have done differently.
Oh, that's interesting. That was an idea I had, a topic for a future QUACKCAST, to talk about the value of looking at bad things and actually sticking with them and going to see what they did wrong.
Well, and here's the thing: like, even if you consider something bad, that is somebody's favorite thing. That is something that someone put their time and energy into, and if we're trying to encourage people to explore their ideas, we can't create this climate of punishing people for doing that. So I'm very much like, yeah, like let's of course be critical, but like, let's not turn it into a bloodbath.
Yes, like a free frenzy. Piranha kind of.
I really like that approach.
I did it a little bit in a recent news post where I found a positive character arc thing that I thought was well done in that Boba Fett show that made me so sad.
Oh dear.
Approaching that.
You did do that. It was quite good actually, Baines. A good take. Although it still hasn't. I still haven't bought myself to actually watch Boba Fett.
It makes me so sad that I wake up in the morning sometimes thinking about it. I have to stop myself. A month and get past it.
Well, and then that's your reason to go ahead and do your own Boba Fett. You know what I mean? It's like, what didn't you like about it? Well, then what you need to do is do what you do like.
Exactly. That's like, I've had similar thoughts lately. I haven't crystallized it into something like you have, but what you're saying is really, I love it. And I think you're totally right about that.
Oh, I'm always right. That's what everybody knows about me. So
it's kind of like a personal thing, yeah. So it's good to know.
Well, and that's because I'm not like married, but like my wife and I have been together for a long time now, and that's one of the phrases in the house is David's always right, because it's like she'll pop off with something and then I'll point something out, and then later she finds out, oh no, he was right. David's always right. So yeah. I could be insufferable sometimes. I fully admit that.
Well, that could be the title of your Friday news post.
Yeah.
Oh dear, I like it. Maybe that's the title of the QUACKCAST. I'm not sure.
That is the title of the QUACKCAST.
We have found it. So, what are you enjoying at the moment as regards media?
So right now, one of my favorite TV shows is back, The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs. Basically, for the next 10 weeks, every Friday night, it's like a 4-hour double feature with Joe Bob popping in and talking about movies and with guests. They had Svengoolie last night, which like made me happy because I love Svengoolie, the horror host. I'm very much big into horror culture, which is interesting because I don't have a horror comic. Because I've never really found quite that angle to go with. But so there's that. My wife and I watch a lot of Letterkenny and Trailer Park Boys. So, you know, I just I like comedy about terrible people, and I also like shows and movies where terrible people die, I guess. So if you're a terrible person, either I think you're the funniest person in the world, or I'm waiting for a psychopath to cut you in half.
I love Trailer Park Boys.
Yes, I love it.
Oh, excellent. Baines and Pitt are very much our horror people, so perhaps we'll do another QUACKCAST where we have you on and we can all get together and talk about horror stuff.
Yeah, especially Pitt Face. She's a lot more educated than me. But you did mention off the air that you write for a horror website. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I write for the Canadian horror website Haunted MTL. It was like a little startup. I got in touch with a guy on Upwork, and then he brought me on board, and I've been doing it since. Like, I'd say a good third of the posts on that website are from me at this point.
Oh, wow.
But, you know, I do, part of the reason the site grew, and I'm proud of this, is because, like, I write these very detailed reviews of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs, so much so that, like, the hosts of the show and the network Shudder have, like, gotten back to me about it and, like, interacted with us and that sort of thing.
Nice.
But I also write horror. You know, that's the thing. I don't do any horror comics, but I actually write in the genre. That's how I got my master's degree, was I wrote a Lovecraftian story that was anti-colonial and turned it into a video game. That was how I got my MA.
Wow.
Oh, fantastic. Wow.
Yeah, so I have a zombie project that I'm just kind of like, I wrote the first third of it, and I just haven't finished it, but I posted it as like a serial, and then I'm doing a werewolf adventure serial novel right now, but that's over on Tapas because they have their whole novel section. So,
Oh, wow.
you know, I write horror, but I just haven't done a horror comic yet.
Well, yeah, that's freaking awesome. I mean, I love sci-fi, but I've never done a sci-fi webcomic, so I think that's how it goes.
Pinky TA is post-apocalyptic, isn't it?
No, actually, it's Diesel Punk, so it's although
Well, we're splitting hairs now.
but it's
supposedly an alternate history.
yeah,
It's
it's
not.
set in the
Okay.
1920s, so it's not the Diesel Punk of
Yeah.
Mad Max. It's like
Right.
It's like the steampunk.
But
type,
I would say diesel punk would fit under science fiction. Like
It
we
does,
we could talk about this all day. At
You're
least
right.
I could.
You're right. Actually, it does fit
Yeah.
into a science fiction.
So again, David's always right.
Mhm. As is the title of this podcast, indeed. Well, we should wrap it up there because Google's going to kick us off.
Mhm.
So, thank you very much for being part of QUACKCAST number 581. This is, if I remember to put that in the title. Well, thank you, everyone. HP Comic, Tons.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Make sure people know where they can find me because I do want more people to look at the comic on the Duck.
Oh, definitely. So,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Look at Cosmic Dash and Warp.
RG Bots.
RG Bots.
Yep.
Galactic Hub Severin.
Mm-hmm.
So all those fantastic things, and also your podcast, Supernatural.
Supernatural Selection.
Supernatural Selection. And-
Speaking of title, that's a great title.
Yeah, Kevin. That's all Kevin. No, actually, that's Mike. Mike is the one of the other co-hosts, and he came up with that one.
Excellent. And also Haunted NTL, is that right?
Yeah, Haunted MTL. And yeah, from Montreal.
Ah, all right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And we've got to say bye-bye because Google's going to kick us off pretty much now.
Okay, then.
Ciao.